My name is Harold Lehman. I'm 81 years old, a retired history professor, and for the past 2 years I've been living in a privately run elder care facility just outside Eugene, Oregon. I tell people it's for the company, for the activities, for the routine, but the truth is simpler and sadder. I had a fall in my kitchen. Nothing catastrophic, just a cracked rib and a badly bruised hip. But when I called my son to tell him, his reaction wasn't worry. It was logistics. "Maybe it's time we talked about long-term care, Dad," he said, as if I were a piece of furniture that needed to be moved into storage. Within 3 weeks, I was packed, transferred, and relocated into a beige room with a view of the parking lot and a distant whine of the interstate. My apartment was sold before I even had a chance to say goodbye to it properly. My son Daniel visits once a month, twice if he needs something. He always brings something, a bag of oranges, a new book he says I'll like but never asks if I've read. His wife Carla comes with him when it's convenient, which is to say, rarely. They bring forced smiles and brisk conversation. They stay 20, maybe 30 minutes. Daniel always checks the medication chart on the wall. He'll nod, say something about staying on top of the routine, and then they're gone, leaving behind a faint trail of perfume and guilt. I used to love when they came. Now I brace myself, like a man expecting a fine for something he didn't realize he'd done. I wasn't always this way, cautious, suspicious, quietly waiting for something to fall apart. Once I was a respected academic, lecturing on Civil War historiography, advising doctoral candidates, writing essays that sparked debates in little university journals. My wife, Margaret, was the one who brought softness to my life. She was an artist, a watercolorist who painted coastal scenes and sunflowers and always wore deep blue scarves that fluttered like birds when she turned. When she died, pancreatic cancer, fast and cruel, I tried to go on as if the world hadn't lost color. I taught another semester. I even wrote a grant proposal. But when I came home to silence every night, when the walls echoed with the absence of her voice, her scent, her humming as she cooked, I shrank. I stopped inviting people over. I started talking to her photograph more than I talked to anyone else. I became, in slow increments, old. Daniel had always been a diligent son. He wasn't warm, exactly, but he was efficient. He got good grades, applied himself, built a career in neurology, married a woman who matched his ambition. He rarely raised his voice, never swore, never hit me, never betrayed me, at least not in any dramatic way. And yet, I look back over the last decade and realize that the betrayal wasn't in what he did. It was in the growing absence of care, the steady decline of empathy. I was becoming an obligation, a box to check. I don't believe my son ever hated me, but I do believe he stopped seeing me as a man and began seeing me as a cost. The facility I live in is clean, sterile, quiet. There's a schedule for everything, meals at 8, 12, and 5, lights out by 10. They serve fish every other Wednesday, overcooked and bland. There are bingo nights and visiting choirs and jigsaw puzzles missing 2 or 3 edge pieces. The staff are mostly kind, though overworked. Most of the residents are older than me or sicker, or both. Some are lucid. Some wander the halls looking for mothers long dead. I keep to myself. I read. I write letters I don't send. I watch the sky shift outside my window. On good days, I walk the garden loop 3 times around. On bad days, I stay in bed and imagine the touch of Margaret's hand on my chest, calming, cool. There is a nurse here named Ellie. She's young, maybe 30, with tired eyes and a quick smile. She reminds me a little of Margaret in the way she crouches when she talks to you, never looking down but always across, like you're equals. She brings my pills every morning and evening, 7 of them now, blood pressure, cholesterol, something for sleep, something for digestion, a multivitamin I don't need, and 2 white tablets I've never understood. "Your son brought these," Ellie once said, holding up the unfamiliar bottle. "He said they're new." From his clinic, I didn't question it. Daniel's a neurologist, after all. If anyone would know what's good for me, it should be him. But lately, I've been tired in a way that feels unnatural. Not just the weariness of age, but something duller, heavier, like I'm walking underwater. I forget words sometimes. I lose the thread of my thoughts. Ellie says it's normal, that it happens to all of us, but something in her face suggests otherwise. She's watching me more closely now. When I joke, she doesn't laugh the way she used to. When I say I feel fine, she tilts her head slightly as if weighing the truth. I have these moments, brief, flickering, when I wonder if something's wrong with me. Not aging, not grief, but something else. An interference. A fog that wasn't there before. I've started writing down my thoughts every day just to see what slips through the cracks. I notice that after taking the white pills, I get drowsy within minutes. I once dozed off during breakfast and woke with oatmeal stuck to my shirt. Another time, I couldn't remember where I'd put my cane. I found it in the bathtub. There's no humor in this, just a quiet fear. A small voice inside me whispering, "This is not who you are." I haven't told Daniel about any of this. Part of me doesn't want to worry him. Part of me doesn't think he'd care. He always says, "Stay sharp, Dad," but his eyes never quite meet mine when he says it, as if he's already preparing for the day I'm no longer myself, as if he's already half grieved the man he used to know. I understand. It's hard to watch a parent decline, but it's harder still to suspect that someone might be nudging that decline along. The other day, Ellie lingered after giving me my evening meds. She looked nervous, which is unusual for her. She fiddled with her ID badge and said quietly, "Mr. Lehman, if you ever feel odd after your meds or if something doesn't sit right, will you let me know?" I asked her what she meant. She just smiled and said, "Just checking in. You're one of my favorites. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what she hadn't said, wondering what it meant that a nurse, a stranger really, seemed more concerned for me than my own blood. Wondering how much of my fading was natural and how much was curated. I thought of Margaret, of how she'd lay beside me and whisper, "We're in this together." But now there's no we, just me, and a slow suspicion that something I trusted is quietly rotting. And still, I take the pills, every morning, every night, because the alternative, refusing, resisting, would be a declaration I'm not ready to make. But I'm starting to keep count. I'm starting to hide them in the drawer instead of swallowing. I'm starting to collect what little power I have left, because something isn't right. And deep down, I think I've known that for a long time. It began, as most things do in places like this, with a mistake that didn't seem like one at first. Ellie was covering the night shift again. She said one of the other nurses had gone on emergency leave, something about a sick child, though the staff rarely shared the full truth with us residents. That night she came into my room earlier than usual, apologizing softly as she rolled the pill cart next to my bed. I was already sitting up, the bedside lamp casting a dim circle of light onto the blanket. She handed me the small paper cup, the usual ritual, 3 colored capsules, 2 oblong white ones, a round orange pill, and 1 tiny beige tab I'd never identified. Normally I would have tossed them back without thinking, swallowed them with the plastic cup water, and leaned into sleep. But tonight Ellie hesitated. Her hand hovered just slightly as she extended the cup, and when I reached to take it, our fingers brushed. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She only looked down at the chart in her other hand and then, carefully, placed the pills on the tray instead of handing them to me. "Mr. Lehman," she said, her voice even lower than usual, "I'd like you to take these in front of me tonight. No rush." Something about her tone, it was soft, but it wasn't casual, made me pause. I took the pills, yes, but I didn't swallow them. I brought the cup to my lips, tilted my head back, mimicked the movement. Then I tucked them discreetly under my tongue. I used to be on stage in college. I still know how to lie with my face. I let Ellie hand me a fresh cup of water, sipped, and gave her a weak smile. "All done," I said. She nodded but didn't leave immediately. Instead, she sat down in the chair near the window, where Margaret used to sit when she visited me here before she died. Ellie crossed one leg over the other and looked at me in a way no one looks at me anymore, not like I was fragile, not like I was wasting away, but like I was someone worth listening to. Then she said, "Mr. Lehman, have you noticed any changes lately? Memory, mood, sleep?" I froze. I couldn't answer immediately because the lump in my throat was too thick, not from fear, but from a strange, bitter kind of recognition. "Everyone forgets things," I managed. "I'm not a young man anymore." She smiled gently, but didn't back down. "That's true. But I've been checking your medication chart, and something doesn't add up." She opened the small pill organizer she had brought with her, a transparent plastic box divided by days and times. "I found this in the backup supply drawer. It has your initials and date labels that match your previous med routine from 2 months ago. And look here," she pointed. "The dosages marked on the box don't match what we're currently administering. Specifically, she tapped one of the white pills with her pen. "These are not what your current chart says they are." I stared at her, my body motionless, my skin tightening over my bones like a rope being pulled. "I didn't change anything," I said. "I wouldn't even know how to." Ellie nodded. "I believe you, but someone did. And I need to ask you something else, and I need you to be completely honest." She leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, her voice now barely above a whisper. "2 days ago, during evening visitation, I was returning from the supply closet. Your room door was slightly open. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, I swear. But I heard your son speaking to someone on the phone. I didn't catch every word, but the sentence I did hear was very clear." She took a breath. "Double his dose. He won't notice." The room felt like it stopped breathing. Even the old radiator stopped its low hissing. I looked at her, blinking as if trying to reassemble a dream I couldn't quite remember. "Are you certain?" I asked. My voice was too calm for the nausea that rose in my gut. "I am," she said. "I thought maybe I misheard. But now, with this pill organizer and the altered dosage, I can't ignore it anymore. I had to tell you I didn't say anything for a long time." I couldn't. I just sat there, the pills still tucked under my tongue, dissolving slowly, the taste bitter and metallic. I got up, shuffled to the bathroom, spat them into a tissue, flushed them, and rinsed out my mouth 3 times. Ellie watched me the whole time, not speaking, not moving. When I returned, I sank into the chair across from her, too shaken to reach for my cane. "What do I do?" I asked. Not to her, not really. More like a child speaking to the ceiling, hoping an answer would drop from somewhere above. "For now," she said, "I've documented what I found off the record. I haven't gone to administration. I wanted to speak to you first. You're still lucid, Mr. Lehman, still capable of making your own decisions. If you want me to escalate, I will. If you'd rather keep this quiet for now and just observe, I'll respect that. But I had to tell you I closed my eyes." A war was already beginning inside me, the father versus the man. The memory of Daniel as a boy with skinned knees and wide eyes against the cold, clinical voice that might have said those words. I remembered how Daniel had insisted on taking over my medications. "I'll simplify everything, Dad," he said. "One kit, one schedule." Less confusion I had thanked him. I had praised his efficiency. I had felt grateful. Now I realized that what I had handed him wasn't just control over my pills. I had handed him the steering wheel of my mind. Ellie stood, sensing my collapse into silence. "You don't have to decide tonight. But please, be careful. Watch your dosages. If something doesn't feel right, don't take it. I'll keep an eye on your chart, and if you feel ready, we can bring this to someone higher." She left without waiting for a response. I sat there long after she was gone, the pill cart still open beside me, my palms sweating. I had never felt so betrayed, not even when Margaret died and left me behind. Because death is natural, but what Daniel might be doing? That was something else entirely. That was choice. That was calculation. I spent the rest of the night at the window staring into the dark parking lot, my thoughts unraveling like thread pulled loose from an old sweater. I tried to tell myself it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe Ellie was mistaken. Maybe Daniel had been talking about another patient. Maybe the medication switch was an error at the pharmacy. But every maybe sounded thinner than the last. And the worst thought of all, the one I couldn't silence, was this. What if this had been going on for months? What if the forgetfulness, the confusion, the dullness in my bones hadn't been age, but sabotage? The next morning, I began to act quietly, cautiously. I asked for my chart. I copied the prescriptions onto a notepad. I pretended to take the pills, but slipped them into a paper towel hidden in my sleeve. I researched the names on the internet in the library room downstairs. I spent 3 hours reading articles I didn't fully understand, but one thing became clear. The 2 white pills were antipsychotics, prescribed off-label for dementia patients to keep them calm and docile. I had never been diagnosed with dementia. No doctor had ever mentioned anything of the sort to me, so why was I being given those pills? In the following days, Ellie and I became co-conspirators. We didn't speak often, too risky, but she'd leave little notes under my dinner plate or in the folds of the newspaper I received in the common room. Stay alert. Don't let them see you tracking. Keep a journal. I did. Every hour I was awake, I wrote down what I ate, what I felt, how my memory was functioning. I noted who visited, what was said, and what time. I began to see patterns. On days when Daniel visited, my chart was often updated within hours, sometimes with subtle changes, a dosage tweak here, a new supplement there. I began to suspect that even the staff were unaware of the specifics. Everything came with a doctor's signature, Daniel's. It was one note from Ellie that finally broke my will to give him the benefit of the doubt. She had slipped it under my dinner napkin. It read, "Check the camera log." I didn't understand what she meant until later that night, when she returned with a USB stick and a grave look on her face. Security doesn't monitor every room, but the hallway cams pick up audio if the door's ajar. This is from last Thursday. Play it in private. She didn't say more. She couldn't. But I understood. That night I snuck into the activity room after hours when the staff had gone home and used the public computer. It took a few tries to load the file. What I heard made my stomach drop. Daniel's voice, clear, cold, casual. He's not going to make it much longer. Just double the dose for now. He won't notice. And if he does, he won't remember. Then Carla's voice, lower, almost amused. That's risky. What if the nurse gets suspicious? Daniel replied, she's just a nurse. And he's just an old man. I sat there in the flickering blue glow of the screen, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might split open. Every part of me wanted to believe I had misunderstood. But there it was, recorded, archived. My son. The boy I taught how to ride a bike. The man I paid through medical school. The man who now saw me as nothing more than a fading inconvenience to be handled, sedated, disposed of slowly. I left the room with the USB clenched in my hand, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. I no longer needed to wonder. Now I knew, and knowing is its own kind of death. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after hearing that recording. It wasn't just shock, though that was part of it, of course. Shock at the coldness in my son's voice, at the quiet agreement in Carla's, at the ease with which they spoke about me as if I were already halfway gone. But there was something worse beneath. It's something deeper and more disorienting, a loss of place in my own life. It felt as though the foundation of everything I thought I had left, my identity, my agency, my name, had begun to crumble, not from some great natural force like age or illness, but from the very hands that should have been holding me up. I kept thinking back to Daniel's childhood, to the way he would crawl into bed with me after nightmares, gripping my fingers so tightly I would lose feeling in them. How he used to say, "You're the only one who makes me feel safe, Daddy." And now, here he was, quietly orchestrating my chemical burial, step by step, dose by dose. I found myself whispering those old phrases out loud at night, as if invoking them could summon the child he once was. "It's okay, son. I'm here. You're safe." But no one answered. Only the hum of the fluorescent light overhead and the wind tapping gently at the window pane. The following week I began hiding the pills. I'd already become skilled at palming them, slipping them into a napkin or tucking them under my tongue, but now I made a small collection, an archive, really. In a cotton-lined metal tea tin I kept beneath the lining of my sock drawer. Ellie told me to keep them, for testing later, maybe, if things escalated. She said it with hesitation, as if she hoped it wouldn't come to that. I, too, hoped. But hope had become a thing I carried with tweezers, fragile and foreign. I noticed that on the days I didn't take the pills, I could think more clearly, string thoughts together like beads instead of letting them fall like seeds on barren ground. My gait steadied, my thoughts sharpened. I reread a chapter of Marcus Aurelius and remembered it the next morning. It was like waking up from anesthesia, except I was waking inside the same room, the same bed, the same body. The change was undeniable. I began to document it meticulously, page after page of observation, my mind, my handwriting, my body, all gradually returning to themselves. And yet, every time Daniel visited, I had to feign decline. I had to act slower, smile in that dull way I'd practiced in the mirror. He would ask casual questions, how I was sleeping, if I remembered the name of my first pet, what year I retired, and I'd fumble just enough to reassure him. "That's normal," he'd say to Carla afterward, barely masking his satisfaction. "The cognitive slide is consistent." I became a character in a play he'd written, and every lie I told him about my own deterioration was its own tiny form of justice. But the weight of it was unbearable. I wasn't trained for deception. I'd spent my entire life believing in facts, in evidence, in the clean logic of history. Now I was living in a kind of quiet war, not just with my family, but with myself. And as the performance continued, the stress began to show. I developed a tremor in my right hand, not from age, but from rage withheld. At night I clenched my teeth so hard I woke with jaw pain. My dreams were thick with confusion, Margaret calling from another room, Daniel pulling me toward a pit, Carla holding a mirror to my face that reflected nothing. Ellie noticed the changes. She said I looked thinner, more tired. I lied and told her I had trouble sleeping. She didn't press. But I saw the concern deepen behind her eyes. She had become the only person I trusted, and I hated the burden I was placing on her. The turning point came the evening Daniel brought me a gift, a new tablet, already loaded with memory games and cognitive tests. "It'll be good to keep you sharp, Dad," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The interface is simple. I can monitor your progress remotely, nothing to worry about." I thanked him. I even acted excited, asked him to show me how it worked. He walked me through it like a man training a pet, slowly, condescendingly, praising me for every button pressed. "There you go," he said, tapping my shoulder like I was a child who'd drawn within the lines. When he left, I didn't touch the tablet. I wrapped it in a towel, shoved it into the bottom drawer of my nightstand, and placed a small Bible on top of it. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of watching me decline on command, but that night something inside me shifted. It wasn't enough to pretend anymore. It wasn't enough to hide the pills, write down the symptoms, build a case. I realized that I wasn't just being erased, I was complicit in my own erasure, and I was done with that. The next day, I asked Ellie to meet me in the greenhouse, one of the only private spaces left in this place. She came after her shift, hair pulled back, her scrubs spotted with coffee. I showed her the journal. I showed her the tea tin with the pills. I even told her about the tablet, about the recording I still kept hidden in my sock drawer on the USB. She didn't interrupt once. She listened, nodded, took notes on a small pad she kept in her back pocket. When I finished, she looked at me in a way that scared me, not with fear, but with resolve. "This is criminal," she said. "You know that, right?" I nodded. "I think I do." "Then we need to do something." "We need to go to the administrator, or the police, or both." I hesitated. "If we go to the administration, they'll talk to Daniel. He'll know I know. And if they protect him..." Ellie's jaw tightened. "Then we go outside the system." "We find someone who'll listen," I asked for a few days to think. Not because I doubted her, because I wasn't sure if I had the strength to see this through. But then something happened that removed all doubt. That Friday, I received a letter in the mail. Not a card, not a bill. An official envelope with the seal of Daniel's clinic on the upper corner. Inside was a form titled Preliminary Assessment of Cognitive Decline, Guardianship Consideration. My name was on it. His signature was on it. A box had been checked. Patient exhibits increasing signs of disorientation, memory loss, and impaired judgment. Recommendation: begin legal guardianship proceedings. My blood went cold. This was it. He wasn't just sedating me. He was preparing to own me, financially, legally, completely. I brought the form to Ellie. Her hands trembled as she held it. "He's trying to lock you in, Mr. Lehman. Once guardianship is granted, you won't be able to make decisions about your care, your money, your medication, anything. He'll have full authority." I asked her if there was any way to stop it. She said yes, but only if I could prove I was competent before the process began. "You need a full psychological evaluation, independent." Outside the clinic, I nodded. "Then help me arrange it." She did. Within 2 days, I had an appointment at a private practice an hour outside town. A car was arranged. Ellie came with me on her own time, off the clock. The doctor, a woman named Dr. Havers, was direct, thorough, unsentimental. She asked questions, gave me tests, looked at my journals, even read excerpts of my old lectures I'd saved in a folder. At the end of the 2-hour session, she sat back and said, "You're more lucid than half my staff." I almost cried, not from relief, but from the sharp, cutting recognition of how close I'd come to losing all this, to losing myself. Ellie helped me get the report notarized and placed in official records. We made copies. We sent one to the administrator of the home, another to a lawyer she knew from a previous patient. Then we waited. The fallout came fast. Daniel was notified. He tried to call me. I didn't answer. Then Carla called, pretending to be worried, saying they were coming to visit that weekend. I told the front desk to deny them entry. I left them a single message on voicemail. "I know everything. Do not contact me again unless it is through a lawyer. I don't know what they'll do next. I don't know what I'll do next. But I know this. I've stopped being passive. I've stopped being a subject of their quiet cruelty. I've reclaimed myself, not just my mind, but my will, and that, in the end, might be all I have left." The day I received the letter from Daniel's attorney was the day my understanding of our relationship broke beyond repair. Until that moment, I had nursed a sliver of delusion, a rusted fragment of belief that what was happening might still be a grotesque misunderstanding, a misguided, but reversible lapse in moral judgment. But the envelope that arrived, hand-delivered by courier, no return address, no warmth in its sterile formatting, put an end to that. It began with the words, "To whom it may concern," and went on to inform me, in formal language, that Dr. Daniel Lehman was proceeding with a petition for full legal guardianship over his father, Harold Lehman, on the basis of documented cognitive decline and increasing episodes of dangerous confusion. The examples cited were fabricated, claims that I had forgotten how to use the microwave, that I had wandered the halls disoriented, that I had attempted to exit the building during a snowstorm in slippers. All false, And yet each accusation wore the mask of plausibility, because Daniel had spent months laying the groundwork, quietly shifting the image of me from retired professor to fading invalid. I held the letter in my lap for nearly an hour, the paper trembling in my hands, not from fear, but from a sensation far more dangerous: humiliation. I was being written out of my own life with the precision of a surgeon removing an organ deemed obsolete. I didn't show the letter to Ellie that day. I couldn't. Something in me recoiled at the idea of exposing even more of my vulnerability, as though the more I revealed, the smaller I became. Instead, I placed it in the back of my journal, behind the pages filled with lucid reflections and careful observations that would contradict every lie printed in that cold legal font. That night, I returned to the old habit of sitting by the window with a blanket over my legs, staring at the parking lot, waiting. Not for Daniel, but for something far more elusive, the moment I would stop feeling betrayed and start feeling resolved. It didn't come quickly. It arrived in pieces, first as anger, then as clarity. The next morning, I called Ellie and asked her to meet me on her break. We sat under the birch tree near the garden path where no one else could hear us. I handed her the letter. She read it in silence, her face tight, her jaw set. When she finished, she folded it once, then again, as if crushing it would reduce its power. "He's escalating," she said. "He's testing whether you'll fight back or fold." I nodded slowly. "Then we fight." She contacted the lawyer she had introduced me to, a woman named Marian O'Connell, a former elder law specialist who now worked primarily with clients dealing with financial abuse and medical coercion. Marian reviewed the documents, read through my journals, reviewed Ellie's nursing notes, the medication discrepancies, the pill samples I had saved, and the audio recording still sitting on the USB drive, preserved like a relic from another world. Her verdict was swift and firm. "This isn't just a guardianship attempt, she said. "This is a coordinated effort to remove your autonomy, access your finances, and control your estate. It's a pattern I've seen before, but rarely this meticulous. Your son has been building this narrative for months, and if we hadn't documented everything, he might have succeeded." Her words didn't frighten me. They steadied me. There is a strange comfort in hearing someone name your enemy clearly, without euphemism. Marian moved quickly. She filed a response to the guardianship petition, attaching affidavits from Ellie, the psychologist who had examined me and myself. She requested a hearing and demanded that all further communication go through her office. She also uncovered something I hadn't thought to investigate. Daniel had recently attempted to transfer power of attorney to himself, forging my signature on a document submitted to the county clerk's office. That discovery turned the tide. It elevated the situation from a civil matter to potential criminal fraud. Meanwhile, Daniel and Carla went silent. No more calls, no more letters, no more visits. I imagined them scrambling, recalculating, trying to decide whether to double down or retreat. I wondered if Daniel regretted how far he had taken things. But when I thought of his voice on that recording, he won't notice. And if he does, he won't remember. I knew he felt no remorse, only the inconvenience of exposure. My thoughts turned more and more often to Margaret during those days. I remembered her hands, always warm, even in winter, her habit of humming when she was anxious, the way she'd tilt her head when watching Daniel as a child, as if trying to decipher a language only she could hear. What would she have done in my place? Part of me believes she would have gone to him, confronted him, tried to understand. But the Margaret I knew also had steel in her spine. She would not have let anyone, not even her only child, poison her husband and call it mercy. Then came the most unexpected moment of all. A letter, handwritten, trembling script on pale blue stationery. It was from my grandson, Ethan. I hadn't seen him in nearly 3 years, not since he'd started college out of state. The letter was brief, awkward, full of hesitations, but sincere. He wrote that he'd heard something strange from his parents about me, something that didn't sit right, that he remembered me differently, sharp, funny, engaged, and he couldn't reconcile that memory with what they were now telling him. "If you're able," he wrote, "I'd like to come visit. I want to hear your side." I read those lines over and over, a strange heat rising behind my eyes. It was the first unsolicited kindness I'd received from a family member in years. I asked Marion if a visit could complicate the case. She said it was my right to see whom I pleased, so I said yes. Ethan came 2 weeks later. Taller than I remembered, thinner, with the anxious energy of someone unsure whether they're walking into a memory or a mistake. We talked for hours. I didn't hide anything. I showed him the journal. I let him hear the recording. He sat still, absorbing it all, his face pale. "I had no idea," he whispered. "I didn't want to believe it, but this isn't just control. It's like they were trying to erase you." I nodded. He looked at me then, really looked, and said, "I'm sorry for being gone, for not asking sooner." I told him he had nothing to apologize for. He had simply believed the story he was told. Now, I said, he had a chance to write his own. When he left, he hugged me tightly, the way Daniel hadn't done in years. I knew I might never see him again, but it didn't matter. That moment had already healed something in me. The hearing was scheduled for early autumn. Leaves were just starting to turn. The air smelled like endings. But I didn't feel afraid. I felt awake. And I realized that everything I had endured, the sedation, the manipulation, the loneliness, had led to this exact point. A place where I could finally speak, not just for myself, but for every older man left to rot in silence, every father reduced to a diagnosis, every life treated as property to be managed. I was ready. The morning of the hearing arrived draped in a sort of heavy stillness, not unlike the silence before a storm, the kind that settles over a town just before thunder announces itself with a violence no one can outrun. I woke before dawn, long before the staff began their rounds, and sat by the window, fully dressed in the suit I hadn't worn since Margaret's funeral, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. I tied my tie twice, not because I forgot how, but because I needed something to do with my hands. I told myself that today was just a formality, that the evidence we'd compiled, the psychiatric evaluations, Ellie's nursing reports, the audio file, the forged documents, would speak for themselves. But fear doesn't care about evidence. It worms its way into the body through memory, and mine was full of moments in which trust had been misplaced, in which appearances had carried more weight than truth. I wasn't afraid of losing the case. I was afraid of standing in front of a room full of strangers and having to explain how a son turns against his father without raising a fist or uttering a cruel word, but simply by managing perception, by altering dosage, by nudging the world's gaze toward decline until everyone begins to see what they're told to see. That kind of betrayal was harder to name, harder still to prosecute. When Marion arrived to pick me up, she looked at me with quiet approval. "You look steady," she said. "I am," I answered, and to my surprise it was true. The drive to the courthouse was uneventful, the landscape moving past the window in slow, symmetrical frames, gas stations, strip malls, the occasional yellowing tree standing stubbornly against the wind. Marion briefed me again on what to expect. Daniel would likely be present, accompanied by his legal team. There would be a court-appointed mediator as well, someone tasked with evaluating the claims from both sides. "Stay calm," she said. "You don't need to prove you're a good father. You only need to prove you're still yourself." I nodded, but in my heart I knew that this wasn't just about competence or legal status. It was about reclaiming the space I had been slowly evicted from, the space of being a human being with memory, with history, with the right to choose my own end. The hearing was held in a modest courtroom with tired chairs and scuffed wood panels. There was no jury, just a judge, a clerk, and the mediator, an older woman with a face like weathered granite and eyes that gave away nothing. Daniel was already seated when I entered, dressed in a charcoal suit and blue tie, the same color tie he wore the day he defended his dissertation, the day I told him I'd never been prouder. Carla sat beside him, impeccably groomed, her expression neutral, but her eyes flicking toward me with something between irritation and disdain. When our eyes met, Daniel gave a tight smile, one that might have passed for courteous in another context, but here felt like the flex of a blade before the cut. I sat beside Marion, adjusted my tie once more, and waited. The proceedings began with formal statements. Daniel's lawyer spoke first, presenting their narrative with the kind of practiced calm that only money can buy. Mr. Lehman had been exhibiting signs of progressive cognitive decline. Dr. Lehman, concerned for his father's safety, had taken necessary steps to ensure proper medical supervision. Recent behavioral incidents suggested lapses in judgment and potential endangerment to self. They cited the same fabricated incidents from the letter I'd received, the microwave, the confusion, the wandering, and for each they produced documentation signed off by a physician on Daniel's payroll. It was clinical, clean, and terrifyingly plausible. Then it was our turn. Marion presented the psychiatric evaluations, each of which concluded unequivocally that I remained of sound mind and judgment. She submitted affidavits from Ellie, who outlined the discrepancies in medication and her personal observations of my cognitive clarity. She introduced the audio recording, sanitized for court, transcribed line by line, and explained how it had been obtained. The judge raised an eyebrow. The mediator finally leaned forward. Marion paused, then laid the forged power of attorney document on the table, like a final card in a losing hand. "We contend," she said evenly, "that Dr. Lehman did not simply act prematurely. He acted fraudulently, with intent, with motive." The room shifted. Daniel whispered something to his lawyer. Carla folded her arms. I was asked to speak. I stood slowly, not because I was weak, but because I wanted them to see the care in my movements, the presence in my posture. I spoke clearly, calmly. I told them about my routine, about the changes I had felt after the medication switch, about the moments of sudden confusion that vanished when I stopped taking the pills. I described how I had begun to suspect, how I had documented everything. I told them about the tablet loaded with cognitive tests, about the way Daniel had spoken to me with the condescension of a man already preparing a eulogy. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. But when I described the moment I heard my son's voice on that recording, when I said the words aloud, he won't notice, and if he does, he won't remember. I saw something flicker in the mediator's face, a shift, recognition maybe, or horror. Daniel was given a chance to respond. He stood and delivered a masterclass in deflection. He admitted to being concerned. He said he had acted, perhaps too aggressively, out of love. He acknowledged that lines may have been blurred between professional oversight and familial fear. He denied any intent to harm. "I just wanted to protect him," he said, his voice soft, trembling even. "He was my father. He is my father." For a moment, even I was unsure he was that convincing. Then I looked at Carla, who hadn't spoken once, and I saw the thin, bitter smile curling at the corner of her mouth like a string pulled too tight. The hearing concluded after nearly 4 hours. The judge did not issue a ruling immediately. She said she would review the materials and deliver her decision within the week. As we exited the courtroom, Daniel approached me. Marion stepped forward, protective, but I raised a hand. He looked at me, not with remorse, but with exasperation. "Why did you do this, Dad?" he asked. "Why make it public?" I stared at him, taking in the sharp lines of his face, the calculated sadness in his tone. "Because you made me invisible," I said, "and now I want to be seen." The decision came 5 days later. The petition for guardianship was denied. The court recognized my full autonomy and issued a formal warning to Daniel regarding the misuse of medical authority. An investigation was opened into the forged document. Marion said we could pursue criminal charges, but I declined. I didn't want revenge. I wanted separation, legal, permanent, clean. I moved out of the facility a week later. Ellie helped me pack. She cried when I left, and I did too. We promised to write. I believed we meant it. I rented a small apartment in a quiet part of town, near a park with a pond and a bench that catches the morning sun. I bought a new tea kettle. I hung one of Margaret's paintings above the couch. Daniel and Carla never contacted me again. Ethan sent postcards. Sometimes we talk on the phone. I ask him about school, about books, about whether he ever wonders how people can change so much and so quietly that you don't notice until they've already disappeared. He says he does. I tell him that means he's still watching, still capable of seeing, and that's more than most. Sometimes when I wake too early and the sky is still that colorless gray before dawn, I lie in bed and think about how close I came to vanishing, not in body, but in spirit, in legal status, in memory. It wouldn't have taken much, just a few more pills, a few more forms, a few more months of silence. I was almost erased, but I wasn't. I'm still here. I remember. I endured. And now I write it all down, page by page, line by line, not for legacy, not for vengeance, but for the simplest reason of all, to prove I was real. I thought the hearing would be the end. I imagined that once the judge handed down her ruling and the paperwork was filed and Daniel was formally denied his guardianship, I would feel some kind of closure, maybe even a quiet triumph. But closure is a myth we tell ourselves when we're too tired to keep grieving, and triumph doesn't belong to those who've survived betrayal. It belongs to those who were never touched by it. What came after the courtroom wasn't peace. It was emptiness, a stillness so total it felt like absence. Not just Daniel's absence or Carla's or the absence of the life I used to think I had, but something deeper, a hollowing out of belief itself. The court had affirmed my mind, my will, my name. But what good is validation when it comes too late to repair what's been destroyed? The new apartment was clean, small, bright in the mornings. The furniture was simple, a bed, a chair, a narrow desk. I brought little with me, just a suitcase of clothes, a folder of legal documents, a shoebox full of Margaret's old letters, and the tea tin with the saved pills, which I still couldn't bring myself to throw away. They sat on the top shelf of the closet like an artifact from another life, and sometimes I'd open the lid just to feel the weight of what almost happened, to remind myself that silence nearly killed me. I hung no pictures except for one of Margaret, and the painting she'd done of the coast near Bandon, where we once walked barefoot on wet sand the year before her diagnosis. The painting had always seemed too cheerful to me, bright orange sky, waves like lace, but now it gave me something else, contradiction, a memory of light in the midst of everything dark. In the days after I moved in, I found myself slipping into a routine that didn't feel entirely like mine. I walked to the park each morning, sat on the same bench, fed the ducks with bits of torn bread even though the sign said not to. I shopped at the corner store where the cashier never asked questions, only rang up my items with a practiced disinterest I came to appreciate. I cooked small meals, though I rarely finished them. I took my medications, only the ones prescribed by the new Dr. Marion referred me to, a gentleman named Doctor Kinley, who always looked me in the eye and never once suggested that my age was a condition to be managed. But even in this new safety, a kind of numbness took hold. I was alive. I was free. But I was no longer sure who I was outside the role of survivor. Then one morning a letter arrived. No envelope, just a folded sheet slipped beneath my door. I opened it slowly, my hands instinctively preparing for another attack, another formality disguised as concern. But it wasn't from Daniel. It was from Ellie. The handwriting was hurried, a little messy, but unmistakably hers. She said she'd heard what happened, that the case had reached the nursing network, that an internal review had been opened, that she was no longer working at the home, not because she'd been fired, but because she'd resigned. I couldn't stay in a place that let it happen, she wrote. Not after seeing what it nearly did to you. She didn't ask for a reply. She didn't include a number or an address, just a single line at the bottom. They nearly made you forget yourself. But you remembered. Don't stop. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the shoebox with Margaret's. It didn't feel like hope, not exactly. It felt like breath. That night, something shifted. I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk and opened my journal. Not the clinical log I'd kept in the home. This was a new one, a blue notebook I'd bought from a thrift store, pages lined and slightly yellowed, the kind of paper that forgives overwriting. I began to write, not observations or symptoms, but reflections. I wrote about Daniel, about the first time he lied to me as a child and how I had laughed, thinking it a normal part of growing up. I wrote about Carla and how I'd never truly known her, how her kindness had always felt rehearsed. I wrote about the day Margaret died, about how I had wanted to go with her, how I'd imagined folding into her shadow like a man climbing back into the warmth of a coat he no longer wore. And then I wrote about the pills, about the moment I realized my life had been taken off course not by accident or illness, but by design. I didn't cry. I didn't stop. I wrote until my hand cramped and the sun began to lighten the walls. 2 days later, Ethan called. He sounded older. His voice had settled into something that no longer carried the fear of being mistaken for a child. He said he'd been thinking about me, that he wanted to come see the new place. I said yes, though I wasn't sure what I would say to him. He arrived the next afternoon, carrying a bag of groceries and a worn paperback copy of a history book I'd assigned him years ago. He smiled shyly when he handed it to me. "I thought you might want to reread something that wasn't about loss," he said. We made tea. We talked about his studies, about the apartment, about the way time sometimes folds in on itself when you're not paying attention. Then he asked the question I knew he'd been holding. "Do you think he meant to kill you?" I looked at him, really looked, and saw how badly he needed an answer. "I don't think he saw it that way," I said. "I think he convinced himself it was for my own good, that I was suffering, and he was managing it. But that's the problem with that kind of power. You stop asking the person what they want. You decide for them." He nodded slowly. "Do you hate him?" I took a long time to answer. "No," I said finally. "I mourn him." The version I thought I knew. After he left, I sat in the chair for hours, watching the shadow of the bookshelf move across the floor as the light shifted. I thought about forgiveness, about whether it was something owed or something chosen. I couldn't bring myself to offer it, not yet, maybe never. But I could offer myself something else, the promise that I would not vanish quietly, that I would continue to write, to speak, to remember. Because memory, I'd come to understand, isn't just something we carry, it's something we defend. That evening, I took out the USB drive for the last time. I played the recording once, listening not just to the words but to the tone, the casual cruelty wrapped in clinical certainty. Then I deleted the file. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I no longer needed to prove it. I had lived it, survived it, written it down, and now I would carry it forward in a voice no one could override. It's been 6 months since the hearing, and the days have settled into a kind of gentle rhythm that no longer feels like a holding pattern, but something closer to life itself. I wake early, not from anxiety now, but out of habit. Old men don't sleep late, we rise with our memories, and I make coffee slowly, letting the aroma fill the room before I take the first sip. The apartment is still sparsely decorated, though I've added a few things over time. A lamp that gives off soft amber light in the evenings, a second-hand radio that plays classical stations with just enough static to remind me of old wood-paneled models from my childhood, and a small clock with a face that glows faintly in the dark, steady and quiet, like a breath that never quite stops. These are small comforts, but they matter. They anchor me. They remind me that I am still here, still choosing, still claiming space. I haven't seen Daniel. I haven't heard from him. Carla sent a brief email through Marion's office 3 months ago, formally worded, apologetic in tone but empty in spirit, offering to revisit the nature of the family relationship at a future point, should mutual understanding become possible. He didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. It remains in a folder titled Closure, unopened since the day I filed it there, because some wounds shouldn't be bandaged with hollow gestures. I no longer wait for a call. I no longer imagine reconciliation as something owed. There's a strange peace that comes from releasing the fantasy that people will return to you whole after they've deliberately hollowed you out. I let that go, and with it, the need for explanation. He made a choice. So did I. Ellie wrote again. She's working at a nonprofit now, advocating for patient rights in long-term care facilities. Her letter was full of stories, some hopeful, some infuriating, and at the end she said, "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if we'd never spoken that night, if I'd walked away instead of listening." I'm glad I didn't. I folded her letter beside the others in the same box that now holds the court documents, the old prescriptions, and the first journal I filled when this all began. I haven't looked inside that box in weeks. Not because I've forgotten, but because I no longer need proof of survival. The fact that I am living freely, thinking clearly, and waking each morning without fear, that is the proof. Ethan visits once a month. We walk in the park or sit by the pond, sometimes in silence, sometimes deep in conversation about history, politics, ethics, family. He asks hard questions. I give honest answers. He once said, "I want to make sure I never do to someone what my father tried to do to you." I told him that the best way to avoid that is to never confuse control with love. Control feels easier. Love takes listening, waiting, humility. Daniel never learned that. I hope Ethan does. There are nights when the apartment feels too quiet, when the shadows stretch too long, and I remember how close I came to vanishing. Not just into sedation or paperwork or guardianship, but into silence. They almost made me forget myself. That is the most dangerous thing age does. It doesn't just thin the skin or slow the heart. It invites others to speak for you, to finish your story while your mouth is still forming words. But I didn't let them. I spoke, I wrote, I resisted. And in that resistance I found something that resembles dignity. Not pride, not defiance, but the quiet, steady refusal to disappear. I sit now at the same desk where I wrote the first pages of this account. The light has shifted. The season, too. The trees outside have begun to brown at the edges, not with death, but with change. I watch them and think of Margaret, of how she would have loved this apartment, this quiet, this sky. I miss her still. I talk to her more now, not like a ghost, but like a witness. She saw the beginning of my story. She would have believed the end. And so I end it here, not with vengeance, not with bitterness, but with a kind of earned stillness. My name is Harold Lehman. I am 81 years old. I was nearly erased. But I remained. I remembered. I am my own. And I am still here.